I wanna give you some bad advice. You heard it right. Bad advice.
I'm starting a podcast. When I mention that to anyone, the first question they ask is, why am I starting this podcast? Honestly, I don't know. But the more important question is, what is it about? If you think about starting a company today, if it's your first time, you're probably going to enroll in some course or program, watch some YouTube videos about startups, or read a book. And what you find is a collection of very generic content, like building your MVP, talking to 100 users, finding early adopters, raising, how to pitch, and so on. That feels very generic. If you look at very successful companies in the past, and you go back to the very early days, you'll notice that they did not follow generic advice. They actually did these very weird fringe things that from the outside looking in looks kind of crazy. So the prime example I have for this is Twitter. Twitter, for the longest time, I think for 11 years, they stuck to 140 characters. Think about all the social media platforms that were started in that time frame, like Facebook, Instagram, and so on, where they kept adding capabilities to the product, like images, videos, reels, and so on. And Twitter stuck to 140 characters for 11 years with hundreds of millions of users. It's crazy. Goes against the grain of like, give users what they want, increase engagement, and so on. The other example I have is Airbnb, where the founders would knock door to door to enroll users in Airbnb. And they would even do maybe something unethical, which was they would list these luxury apartments at 1/10 of the price. And when people reached out, they would say, oh, it's not available, but check the other listings on Airbnb. And this is the type of advice that nobody talks about or wants to talk about. There's this chapter in the 0 to 1 book, Peter Thiel's book, that talks about how these successful founders were kind of weird when they were younger, when they were kids, and gives some examples, and then poses a question that, is everybody weird and we just don't recognize it because not everybody becomes famous? Or is it that famous, successful people were weird when they were kids? I like to think of this question for companies too. I think every company has its weird decisions or weird culture or something strange they're doing with the product or their marketing that works for them. And it's hard to talk about those because if you look at the past 100, successful companies and you try to find trends, well, trend means is that it's not weird. It's not unique, right? That's what trend means by nature. So this podcast is about the weird things that companies are doing. It's about the fringe founders doing crazy things that everybody would be like, should you be doing that? Generic good advice is for building generic companies, but startups are not generic. Bad advice is for founders who want to do crazy things that are out of the norm. And of course, it's bad advice. It's probably not going to work out for you. And by the way, this wouldn't be fun without guests. We're going to have a lot of guests on this podcast who are mostly early stage founders who are doing great in their companies and believe in thinking differently and doing things differently. And we're going to hear their stories, the bad advice they have for you. Generic advice is for building generic companies. Bad advice is for building good ones. Thank you for listening. Hope to see you in the next episode with our very special guests.
I wanna give you some bad advice. You heard it right. Bad advice.